All right, I don't mean to be so argumentative and combative right off the top here, a contrarian, if you will, to begin Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation. Normally, that's Dani's role, actually, so I don't want to step on your toes, Dani, you know. But there's a question here that's included as part of today's game plan, and there's a lot more coming beyond this, including a new nickname alert. So I know what you're thinking right now. Wow, Calvisi's got a new nickname just waiting to stink. But we'll see. We'll see. Have a little more faith in that. I can read your face, Dani. I know. I'm being profiled right now based on the nickname. That will come a little bit later. But the question as posed in the game plan by Darren Urban was, what did you do on the bye? You know, maybe a small talk type conversational thing. Dare I say, the more apt question really is, what did you not do on the bye? For example, I did not deal with the 101 and have to commute for 3 days. Didn't have to put on or take off any Paulie pancake TV makeup. I did not ask any dumb questions in a press conference that would blow up in my face because there were no press conferences. So, you know, it's everything. I did not have to keep my head on a swivel for a 300-pounder coming out of bounds near the sideline, and see my life flash in front of my eyes. I think the bye weekend really is more about what you did not do, dare I say.
I think that's quite fair. Isn't that the kind of the point of the bye weekend?
Yes, you're right. Say goodbye to any real work-related duties.
I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't do any work, but I did far less work than you probably are guessing, Dani. And
I'm really proud of you.
Now, it might have been in part because I was sick and broken, and that's just where I am as a human being.
Wow. Darren's on the injury report.
Really? Okay. Questionable, doubtful. I mean,
I'm back to full.
Gotcha. Okay.
Miraculous recovery.
Were you a few hours ago? Were you a game day decision? Have you just
No. This faded out by probably Sunday afternoon.
Just in time to come back to work.
That's usually how it works for me.
See, meanwhile, Dani's just hitting her stride because she spent her bye weekend counting how many different fantasy football playoff postseason she's in. What's the number?
3.
3. Okay. All right. I don't know if I'm more.
Of 3 leagues.
3 leagues.
Thank you.
Damn.
Never really. 3
who said
different
being a general manager is hard work?
Wow. Okay. Hello. Here we go. You know, speaking of the playoffs, can I go on a small rant here?
Go. Are we talking about real playoffs or fantasy?
Talking
playoffs?
about the real NFL playoffs.
That's fine.
They posted a graphic, the playoff picture on Monday Night Football, and who's in, who's out, and where it all stands. Can I say that I'm more than a little underwhelmed by the playoff picture?
By the 6 and 7 teams in the hunt?
I mean, look at the NFC. After you have the Niners, Dallas, and Philly, all 10-3, Detroit 9-4, okay. You have Tampa, Minnesota, Green Bay, the Rams, Seattle, Atlanta, New Orleans, all 6 or 7 win teams at this point. I mean, nobody sweats those teams.
Well, that's true, but like once we went to 7 playoff teams, that's always what was going to be with a month left in the season. There was always going to be this handful of very mediocre teams that were in the playoff picture.
I mean, the AFC is even worse. You got Baltimore, you have Miami, which just lost to Tennessee. Blew that 14-point lead at the very end. KC, who's been struggling, right? The Chiefs have a 1-game lead on the Denver Broncos right now. 8-5 versus 7-6. Think about that. Think about the way so Denver's squarely in the playoff mix, and then you have Jacksonville and Cleveland, and then you got a half dozen teams that are 7-6: Pittsburgh, Houston, Indianapolis, Denver, Cincinnati, and Buffalo. I mean, really? So I guess my point of this whole thing is that for anyone who says this is a 2 or 3 year rebuild to get back to the postseason, absolutely not. The Arizona Cardinals easily and most likely will be a playoff contender next year if the offseason goes as designed.
You're right, and I'm going to let Dani answer that real quick, but I just want to put in the thing. So as you look over this playoff picture, were you the one in 2008 who called the Cardinals the worst playoff team of all time before the playoffs?
Oh, no. I wasn't here. Answer the question.
No, I definitely was not. I wish I was, actually, because I'd be making about $15 million a year as one of the voices of Sunday Night Football, Chris Collinsworth.
Right. Okay, Dani, you can answer the question now.
I do think that's a fair sentiment to have. I mean, there's still 4 games left, so some of those teams could end up with 11 wins, which really isn't a horrible season.
No,
so I guess that's
not at all.
Right?
Not at all. No, you're right.
And I think that's a good point, Paul, because imagine if Kyler Murray had been healthy all year. How many wins would the Cardinals have gotten in that time span besides just one over the Cowboys? So that is a really good point. And, we've talked about the rebuild, or maybe not so much a rebuild, but the transition year, and that you can feel that this team with the players and the character and the coaching staff, that they are moving in the right direction. And we were talking about this at practice a couple weeks ago, Darren, that it doesn't feel like this is going to take a long time. You could truly see in the near future a quick turnaround from the changes that are being made.
Well, I mean, to Paul's point, even, not only do I not think it's going to take 2 to 3 years, it can't take 2 to 3 years. I mean, ultimately, everything is good right now. You're trending in the right direction. But if you take only a small step next year and then you're still treading water in year 3, that doesn't. And I'm not just talking about the Cardinals and what Michael Bidwell might do. That's almost every owner in this league. You don't get that much time. You better figure out a way to get in the mix.
And specifically, honestly, if we're in the trust tree here on Cardinals Underground, specifically, you have to figure out a way to beat your division opponents. The Niners have won 11 straight games in the NFC West. You've lost 14 out of 16 against Sean McVay. Seahawks is always competitive. If you have Kyler in the first meeting against the Seahawks and you're +3 in the turnover ratio, I'm guessing you probably win that game. But you can look at some of these other playoff contenders, and I use that loosely, but it's reality this year. Tampa and Minnesota and Green Bay and Atlanta, and Cardinals already beat the Falcons. But in your division, you got to figure this out. To me, over this last month, you had your 2 games against the Rams. There was a stretch there. You played the Niners pretty tough in week 4, down 21-3. You made it 21-16 mid to late third quarter, and then it got away from you in the fourth. So you have the rematch against the 49ers. Now you have Kyler. Now you have Budda Baker back. And then you have Seattle to end the season. To me, if there's a couple of boxes you need to check, it's be competitive and or post a win against these division opponents.
It hasn't been easy. And that's what feels like the uphill battles when you look at the division and having to find a way to be competitive and be on top. And offensively, they have struggled for explosive plays and having multiple games where you have consistent rhythm and you're moving the chains, because it feels like you might have a game here or there, at least this season for Arizona, but we haven't seen that consistently. We haven't seen games strung together like that. And at least this year, when you're naming all those teams, and I'm thinking of the games against those divisional opponents, Paul, when I think of defense, I think of the run game. Yep. That's what stands out of all those divisional opponents, is just getting run over.
And I think it's fitting the run scheme. It's the Rams and what they did with that whole, stretch in some of the zone and the crack toss, and 174 yards in the second half of the first game, 228 total in the second game. Just somehow the gap integrity isn't there. What the Niners are able to do with a lot of the shifts and motions. I asked Nick Rollis this week how similar those 2 run schemes are. He said, not really. At least not to
he pretty much took you apart, didn't he, Paul?
That's why. The second thing I mentioned, what I did not do over the bye weekend was ask a dumb question in a press conference, because there was no press conference.
We have to make clear, dear listener, that he tried really hard to be nice about it, but as he kept talking about it, it became a lot more dismissive. Like, they have nothing to do with each other.
Because it can always get worse. It did. The more his answer went on, the more my question looked. There's no doubt. But I wanted an answer to that. Is it a similar challenge and or fit when you go against the Rams run game, to Dani's point, and the Niners run game? Because if not, you need 2 totally different game plans, because you haven't been very successful stopping the run of either coordinator, whether it's McVay or Shanahan. And I use coordinator because they're the mastermind behind their own offenses, even though they're the head coach. They have a problem in that area with trying to fit in terms of, every single time seemingly you play the Rams or Niners. You hear those 2 words, gap integrity. And so I'm really curious, and I agree with you, Dani, more than anything on Sunday in this rematch against the Niners, can they fit the run defensively?
Well, then it works out well. The Steve Wilkes will be on the field, right?
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely
gap integrity.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Oh boy. So, I almost busted out my new nickname right now, but I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it.
See, you can't just tease us.
No,
like that,
since
Paul.
we're talking big picture, on the Big Red, Here's my question before we get into Kyler specifically. Do you think the offense found a new identity in Pittsburgh? 24 times under center, more than the first 3 games combined. 38 rushes for $150, right? A true commitment, if not emphasis on the run game. 11 of the 13 completions to tight ends. Do you think maybe the Cardinals offense, I don't know, evolved and or had an epiphany of sorts that we're going to see over the final month?
Yes, I do think that the offense evolved. I'm not sure that after one game I can say that the identity has been set or become what it was, because that was really the first game we'd seen all of those aspects come together in one play. I think it was a couple of things that contributed to all of that, of having the lead. I think the weather and running the ball and protecting the ball, and the fact that James Conner was going off back in Pittsburgh, a place that means a lot to him, against an organization that means a lot to him. But I think when it comes to Trey McBride and utilizing the tight ends, that is the aspect that I think the identity of this offense has changed in a way that we haven't seen this year or in years past, given that was obviously a different staff in years past. Trey McBride has stepped up, to say the least, in every aspect of his game, and he has been reliable. And I also like that in games where there has been miscommunication and an interception or an incomplete pass, whatever it might be, Kyler's doing what seems like a better job of continuing to go to McBride, continuing to target him and kind of work through those things and not get caught up of, oh, okay, I'm going to see what else is working after one mistake. So I like that they're continuing to work through that together. That's the part of the Steelers game that I could see as, I would say at this point, the identity has changed, and this quarterback knowing what he has in his new tight end one.
I think they would love for that to be the identity, but a team with an offensive identity like that needs to have a consistently strong defense. And as we just talked about, that isn't necessarily what's going on with the Cardinals right now. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's an identity. And when you talk about Trey McBride, he's been great, and we're going to notice it even more because it's a tight end, and that's not something the Cardinals have done in their history, quite frankly. But if you strip off positional things, Trey McBride's the best pass catcher they have. He happens to play tight end right now, but I don't know why you wouldn't go to him first. He's the best person to go to right now.
It's why we've now dubbed him Calvisi Consulting.
I like that it's Trey McBride.
Pigskin Division.
Can I do a drum roll?
Thou shalt be known going forward as Trey McPlay.
Oh, that's not bad.
Okay,
Paul.
I got to
definitely exceeded my expectations for sure.
That's not bad.
I'm going to
Trey
work it in
McPlay.
a little bit here and there. I'll work it in, Trey McPlay, and we'll see. Maybe, just maybe, it might get a little traction. Maybe we'll see.
And you know that if you brought that up to Trey, he is so sweet. He would have the biggest grin and tell you he loves it, even if he did not.
Yeah. I mean, it can't be any worse than some of the nicknames that Wolf has foisted on the Red Sea over the years. I mean, come on now, right?
That's true.
I mean, it's surprising. Everyone wonders why Larry Fitzgerald tackled Wolf 2-3 times during training camp.
At least.
Because he nicknamed him the Japanese fighting fish.
Which I actually think that's hilarious.
Hilarious.
I know Omo on the other side of the glass hates it, but I think it's funny.
At the very least, it should be the Japanese fighting fits.
I like Japanese fighting fish better than Humble Rumble.
Adrian Wilson, I had to get between Adrian Wilson and Ron Wolfley on an episode of The Big Red Rage
boy.
when we used the Gas Man. He didn't like the Gas Man. Didn't like that nickname either.
That probably wasn't good.
That was not good. Not good. Just for that, actually, Adrian Wilson took the number 24 and went to 5 Pro Bowls and topped Wolf's 4. That's what Wolf got for that.
Where does Andy fit on the list?
Andy, oh man! Just when I thought it
what
was
was the
out
one?
of my
What was
life.
the one from training camp this year?
Oh, you mean Isaiah?
No. Paul had one this year.
Isaiah.
No.
It's not my fault he didn't work out. I mean, he was supposed
I thought there was another one this year.
He was supposed to raise his game to fit the nickname of Isaiah. It's not my fault. Same with Andy. My goodness. Let's just hope it's not like this.
They're letting you down, Paul.
Let's hope it's not like the Madden curse. All of a sudden, these nicknames, and I'm
Trey
throwing
McPlay.
out there.
I think
Trey McPlay. How about that?
I'm in on that. I do want to see what his reaction is. It's funny because I remember way back in the day, we in this department started calling LaRod Stevens Howling the hyphen.
Oh yeah.
And I remember going up to him one day and telling him about it, and I don't know if he didn't hate it. He clearly didn't love it. But we still call him that. And
Yeah.
in fact, did a whole Folktales episode with the hyphen in the title. And I guess it worked out.
Yeah. He sat down for the interview.
That's right, he did.
Did.
Must not have been.
Dani worked hard for that interview.
Too.
She did.
Listeners.
Sorry.
Yes.
Well, you leverage your Texas ties, right? Is that how that came to be?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't need to.
I can't divulge
Okay.
my secrets, Paul.
Look, here's the deal. Let me just bottom line this, okay? Dani, like you run your fantasy football teams, and I do mean plural. How are you in 3 leagues, by
'Cause
the
I'm
way?
popular.
Really? Okay. Let me just say that if I'm running the Cardinals offense, and I'm most definitely not, he gets at least 2 tight end screens per game, Trey McPlay. Okay? 2 tight end screens at least. Dude is so good with the ball in his hands. Get some blockers in front of him, especially when tackles are trying to go through blockers to get to him. He's going to run through those arm tackles. Honestly, I think it's derelict of duty if he doesn't get at least 2 tight end screens every single game. Who's with me on that?
Sure.
I don't not love that.
Okay.
I guess I want to see it, but the way he runs the ball angrily, the way he'll take on, I mean, if you do it right with a tight end screen, I feel like that's an 8 to 10 yard play every time.
Agreed. Yep. Totally agree.
At least.
And by the way, the whole offensive identity thing. Okay, let me just go back to that real quick.
I feel like he's going to kind of like chastise us.
When Drew Petzing came to this team, did we not talk about how ultimately, this would look a lot like the Browns offense, specifically the Kevin Stefanski scheme? Do you think for the first time we saw it against an AFC North opponent at Pittsburgh? That's why I'm bringing this up. Kyler Murray's up there telling the media, okay, that's my 4-game preseason. Did Kyler Murray have an epiphany of sorts when he realized early in that game that my footwork is, quote, too fast, that I was sped up? See, there are a couple of things that happened in that Pittsburgh game. It was Kyler telling the media about, okay, I started too fast. My footwork was too quick. I was ahead of the receivers in a lot of ways, and it was impacting my throws. And sure enough, the numbers would he started 0 for 4 on 3rd down and ripped off 9 out of 11. Not all those were passes, but the offense really got in sync. And then there was Jonathan Gannon the Monday of the bye week saying that, among other things, with the Cardinals offense, and him and Drew Petzing had a conversation, and he shared with him, it's not a bad thing to repeat a play until they can stop it. So how many times, for example, in that 99-yard drive, did Kyler just go, here you go, Trey McBride, boom, here you go. He's single covered by a box safety or a linebacker, he's open. If he's single covered by that kind of defender, you're open. He just kept going back to it, including 2 touchdown passes in a row, if you believe Trey. He's still incredulous, right? They took away the first one. So I just wonder if in December, finally, now you have your franchise quarterback, and he's working and getting some of the rust off and assimilating to a very different scheme, very different footwork. And from all accounts, Kyler is taking to the coaching, like we said, under center 24 times. Because people go, oh, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal, if you talk to some of the coaches, is that he's got his back to the line of scrimmage for the first time in his career. And that's very different as opposed to being in the gun, where you take the snap, your head's up, your eyes are on the defense the entire time. Not if you're taking play action fakes and your back's to the defense and you're carrying that out from under center, and then boom, you got to turn around and there's sort of that moment where you don't know what you're going to find when your eyes go back downfield. So that's a process for someone who, for 10 years of his playing career at a high level, high school forward, has been doing it completely different.
We've talked about this a million times. I mean, again, everything Kyler is doing, he's done in games 4 times in his life. Not everything, but a lot of the things he's doing, he's done 4 times in his life over the last month. I don't care how many years he's been in. There was a sequence on Sunday Night Football. Another good reason to be on the bye. You actually get to see all the games, other games. On Sunday Night Football, where they were talking about Dak Prescott learning to...
Here we go.
Well, I wasn't going to do that one. That was very nice there.
Thank you.
Do I need to not talk so we can cut that out later? Just checking. And about taking 2 steps and getting it out, that quick West Coast kind of thing, the Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, whomever. But I was also watching all the footwork. They were showing all those different quarterbacks that do it the same way, watching all their footwork. They all had left foot forward, which I thought was interesting.
Wow.
But I guess Dak Prescott was telling them he feels like he's had an epiphany doing this kind of thing. And not to make a direct correlation, because I don't know exactly what they're teaching Kyler in terms of that. But, I mean, Dak Prescott's been in this league longer than Kyler Murray, and he was learning something new that he hadn't done in his career, and it took him a few games, and now he's saying it's all kind of clicking in. I think that's the hope with Kyler. Like, it's going to click to that level. And I know fans don't want to hear this, but once he missed the first part of the year, once the losses piled up, this year was going to be about setting stuff up. And one of the things they needed to set up was Kyler Murray understanding what he was going to have to do in this offense.
Just because the Cardinals aren't playing in December for a playoff push doesn't mean they're not playing meaningful football. Moral victories don't count in the NFL. I understand that. There is a lot to be learned in these final 4 games of the season for this staff. Do the players that they have fit with what they want in the future? And not only that, which players are players you can build around on all sides of the ball? Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, your interior offensive line. There's a lot of questions. It's not just quarterback of, does the staff want to ride with Kyler Murray and for the long haul? And there's a lot of positions on defense. There's still a lot that you can learn. And I think this staff specifically, from what we have gathered from General Manager Monty Ossenford and head coach Jonathan Gannon in terms of character and the type of effort and fight that they want to see, the fact that this team is not playing for the playoffs, how are the players responding in the locker room, in the meeting rooms, on the field? There is still a lot that they are playing for. And I think, at least in my experience here in Arizona in the past, when it has felt like playoffs were already out of reach, you could tell that some people didn't really seem like there was a lot of meaningful football, right? It was, okay, let's get to the end of the season. Let's, get to the off season and start moving forward. It doesn't feel that way. And I wouldn't imagine we're going to see that in these last couple weeks of football.
Because I'm usually wrong on these things, no matter how close we are to the team. I was certifiably mortified going into Pittsburgh based on the lackluster effort you saw against the Rams at times, which Jonathan Gannon cited and called enthusiasm or lack thereof. Dennis Gardeck, after that Rams loss, saying he wanted to see more fight. Now you're going on the road. It's before the bye. It's going to be bad weather. You got a Steelers team, Mike Tomlin, 29-11 at home in December in his Steelers career as head coach. Everything was lining up for what could be a really lopsided outing. And it was just the opposite. And to me, there are things you judge on the scoreboard, and there are things you judge that you can just see are being built on the sideline, in the locker room, on the practice field. Josh Woods has said more than once he sees similarities to what Dan Campbell did with the Lions. They had a miserable first season. They had a miserable first half of the second season, and then things turned. And when things turn, they can do so in a hurry. So, am I predicting a win against the NFL's best team, the 49ers? Absolutely not. But if you can come out, and to your point, Dani, everyone's trying to put film out there because, once again, those 2 words, no allegiances. If you thought there will be blood last offseason, there's no reason why it couldn't happen again this offseason. There's that. And then I think there's also trying to get some confidence against some of these division opponents, especially a Niners team that's had its way against you for a couple of years running now.
Did you just say there will be blood, so you used a different movie than The Purge?
I did.
Or is there blood in The Purge? I would imagine there's blood.
Well, of course there's a lot. Why do you think it gets the R rating there, Dani? I mean, of course there's
Are they
plenty
all
of...
R-rated? Name the ones that are R-rated, Paul.
Well, let's see. There's The Purge. There's The Purge Anarchy. There's the first Purge, the Forever Purge, Purge Election Year, and then The Purge Big Red Off Season, or whatever we called it. The Big Red Purge is what we call 2023.
Like if there's a purge, why would the first thing you want to do would be to murder someone?
Well, why
would that be where you're...
It's just to sow chaos, really, is what it is. There's a 24-hour period where there can be chaos.
I think if you're going to ask those kinds of logistical and philosophical questions about
I won't survive the purge.
That's right. Detach your brain before you sit down to watch.
I think society has moved past philosophical thoughts if you're having the purge.
I mean, if society can embrace Tommy DeVito and that whole scene on Monday Night Football.
Tommy Cutlets, baby.
It's kind of incredible.
It's all me! Yeah.
the agent and the fedora and his family
goodness.
handing out meatballs and chicken cutlets and pasta at tailgates.
See, Paul Calvisi over here is actually feeling a little upset.
I'm conflicted.
You feeling
I am conflicted.
Typecast here?
Little conflicted. Was it entertaining? Absolutely. Did it reinforce every Italian stereotype that's out there? No doubt it did. He's got the agent who looks like Silvio from The Sopranos. The dad who Peyton Manning was calling Johnny Fontaine, which is a great reference to the first Godfather. You have the family out there making chicken parm sandwiches.
Which looked delicious,
They
by the
did.
way.
So does that mean you never watched and don't support the Jersey Shore?
Who was the fullback who was drafted by the Cardinals in the 5th round? This is going back about 10, 15 years, who then went to the Chiefs. He had a long career with the Chiefs. Who was that guy?
I see his face.
Because
Sherman.
Not Ed Sherman.
No.
What was his name? Oh, my goodness. Holmes, where are you when
I
we
was
need
just
you?
trying to look through the glass. He for sure knows. Here he comes.
Here he
I
comes.
knew he would
This
know.
is awesome.
Oh, no.
Anthony.
That's right.
Anthony.
That's right. They used to do the Anthony, and the whole thing. And it took that locker room when he was a rookie about 15 minutes to nickname him Jersey Shore, because he was from Jersey. He had the accent, Anthony, and he had he'd wear all the gold chains. He was right out of Central Casting from
really
Jersey
was.
I
Shore.
loved that show.
Oh my goodness. But so by the way, the headline in the New York Post, because I couldn't resist this morning to take a look at it, because he's known as Tommy Cutlets. Because you realize he's living at home, Dani.
I don't
You
know that I
realize-
lived at home for a long
My
time.
kids
after
are
I
living at home and
graduated.
they're adults. What is that not supposed to
Honestly,
happen?
it was a great setup.
By the way, here's his quote on Tommy Cutlets living at his parents. He said it's like 12 minutes away. He says it takes me 12 minutes to get here. He said I couldn't even find a place closer to my work if I wanted to. And he said I don't have to worry about laundry, what I'm eating for dinner. He said chicken cutlets and all that. It's waiting for me when I get here. My mom still makes my bed. Everything is handled for me.
Okay, I will say I've been making my own bed since I was like 4, and my parents didn't do my laundry when I lived at home. But everything else sounds nice.
So there you go.
Hey, we just had a laundry conversation last night.
Yeah. So
Not with me.
No, not
Like, I don't know
us.
this conversation.
Well, because my oldest is about to move out and he's moving in with his girlfriend, and apparently at one point laundry was brought up, and she apparently was making the assumption she would end up doing his laundry because that's what her mom does. My son said, "You're not touching my laundry," because my kids have done their own laundry since they were tall enough to reach into the washer.
come on now. Really?
Oh, hell yeah.
well, your kids are
Why
tall,
wouldn't
so
they?
is that young or old?
I would guess my oldest son is 24 now. He says he's been doing it at least since he was 15.
See, what do I
Maybe longer than that.
Why do I have visions of the old Peter Brady episode flooding the whole house with suds and soap bubbles and
See, that always ticked me off because it's not that hard.
I only did that once, but it was with the dishwasher
oh no,
in college.
Dani, come on.
Came back, the kitchen was covered in suds. Anyway,
What'd you do? Load in like 4 gallons?
I-
How does that happen?
I honestly,
Huh?
I don't remember. I must have done more than I needed to, or didn't. I don't even remember if we did a pot. It was a really old house and dishwasher. But the worst part is, I loaded it. I lived with 4 other girls, and
There were 5 of you?
Yeah,
Yeesh.
and I loaded the dishwasher. I was being a good roommate. I started it, and then I left for my job at the news station. And then I was the only one home. Everyone else was like at class or whatever they were doing. And then we get a text in the group, and it's a picture of the kitchen that's like covered in suds. And it's like, oh, what happened? And so they ended up all coming home, and I'm the only one who wasn't there to clean up.
Did you ever find out why it did that?
No, I don't remember. I only did it one time though.
Well, it was by design. She wanted to clean the floors as well. That's what she wanted to do.
Sure.
Okay. So Michael Wilson, if he's tracking to play on Sunday, big game against the Niners in Week 4, 7 for 76, 2 touchdowns. Do you know there are 3 rookies now in the last 20 years of Cardinals football that have had multiple touchdown games, receiving touchdowns as a rookie? Larry Fitzgerald, John Brown, and now Michael Wilson.
Wow.
So, and to be able to run the ball in Pittsburgh, and I talked to Lorenzo Alexander about this, big deal or not a big deal, Cardinals were able to run the ball, especially that fourth quarter, obviously, against the Steelers, minus their 2 best blocking receivers in Zach Pascal and Michael Wilson.
Good point.
So if indeed he's back, I mean, you got 4 games to try and establish a guy who was having an all-rookie type campaign a couple months into the season before he got hit by injury.
I love the what he could boost to the offense, like what we were talking about before. Why is Trey McBride that guy right now with Hollywood Brown disabled at the moment? Like, Trey McBride is that guy to throw to. I think Michael Wilson helps that so much. It will be interesting. Going back to you talking about the identity again, the identity from that game in part came about. Hollywood Brown left early because he was hurt. There was no Michael Wilson. There was no, like, in some ways their identity was forced by what hand they were dealt. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in fact, I even asked Jonathan Gannon this week, like, James Conner had 25 carries last week, which tied the second most he had ever had in his career. And I'm like, okay, philosophically, is that something you'd like? Basically feeding your guy. And I was in there, yeah. I did not get the impression that he was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. I got the impression like that's kind of what happened, but that's because in the last 4 minutes he was ripping off 8 to 10 yard runs. Why wouldn't you keep giving it to him? But I don't think that's the goal.
No, probably not. To your point, it's hard to argue what they did was out of necessity, first and foremost. A, they were missing receivers. B, at that point, they have the lead in the fourth quarter, and you're trying to salt it away. And, oh, by the way, you just wore down their defense, and 75 of his rushing yards were in the fourth quarter alone. And as I think Kyle Vandenbosch pointed out, it's amazing how certain defenders will take mysterious angles to the football, and James Conner in particular in the fourth quarter when it's already decided. And they don't have real interest of locking horns. So, okay. But I just keep coming back to Drew Petzing and his background and why he was hired.
I get it.
And that whole Kevin Stefanski thing. And so are we – now, look, they're going to adapt and do what's best for the personnel.
Sure. But
obviously they have to meet in the middle somewhere or else they wouldn't have changed Kyler Murray's footwork.
I agree. And I will say, like, getting back to the Michael Wilson thing, I do think how he plays – both catching the ball and blocking, which he embraces, fits perfectly with that style that you're talking about.
Now, speaking of running backs, Christian McCaffrey, you got to figure out an answer to Christian McCaffrey. If you're the Cardinals, 4 touchdowns in the first meeting, 3 on the ground, 1 through the air. Now, Budda Baker is going to be healthy this time around, was not there in week 4, Dani. What do you think? Do we smell a spy, perhaps, in this game? Budda Baker?
I don't think that's a bad idea. I'm just trying to think, has anybody this season been able to stop CMC?
Not so much.
Right? It's about limiting him and not, to me, it's not letting explosive plays happen, because a player like McCaffrey is going to have a good game. That's just, doesn't matter who he's playing, that's what we've learned. I think about the other teams that don't have a player on that caliber that have had explosive runs and gotten significantly more yardage on plays they should not have against this defense. That to me is what improvements can be made from the first matchup. What can you do to limit McCaffrey? He's going to get the ball and he's going to get yards, right? Like, but what can you do to minimize that? That's what I would want to see against the run game. And without really having a chance to go back and look at the numbers and my notes from that first matchup, the other thing that stands out is ASU grad wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, who was either always open or always able to get an insane amount of yards after catch. And I do remember that before that first matchup was when I learned that Ayuk was a Sun Devil.
Forks up.
Yeah, he was a problem. He was a headache. There's no doubt about it. What's amazing is, real quick, in that Seattle game, you talk about how explosive they are, right? The 4 big weapons, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk.
You need any of this, Paul?
They combined for over 500 scrimmage yards. Yeah, it chokes me up just thinking of what it's like trying to defend all those guys. The Niners are like, we had 527 total yards last week against Seattle, and we weren't even that good. We punted it 5 times and still had over 500 total yards.
Efficient.
So that's how explosive they can be. Save me, Darren. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say a couple quick things. One, Dani was mentioning that she just had recently learned about Brandon Ayuk being a Sun Devil. She literally learned today Al Michaels was a Sun Devil. I just thought
why would you expect that I would have this extensive knowledge about ASU grads?
I mean, it's just disappointing. The other thing I would say is I saw a stat today on the internets that there are 3 teams that have at least 3,400 passing yards this year.
Okay.
One of them is the 49ers. 49ers, I believe, have the fewest passing attempts in the NFL.
Wow. Yeah, that is remarkable. And I guess it would make sense because they have a lot of big leads and they're running it in the fourth quarter, so they're not necessarily.
But they're getting their yards, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And everyone's a tough tackle. Deebo Samuel, Ayuk, the separation he gets, George Kittle, right? Think about it. And then Christian McCaffrey. They have 4 of the toughest tackles in the NFL on one team. But what's interesting is to talk about the former Arizona Cardinals High School Player of the Year circa 2017, I believe, Brock Purdy. Trent Williams came to Brock Purdy's defense last week. Do you see that quote? He said, if Brock Purdy was Zach Wilson, the number 2 pick overall, he'd be the unanimous MVP right now. So I'm tired of hearing that he's got all these weapons. So look what he's doing out there and the caliber of ball he's playing. I don't think he gets anywhere near his due. This is Trent Williams now, because he was the last pick in the draft. People are too easy to dismiss him. If he was the number 2 pick in the draft, he'd be hailed as the next Aaron Rodgers.
I will say that the idea that he has too many weapons to get credit is kind of funny. I saw people making this point, but it's an obvious point. When you look at some of the quarterbacks that have won the MVP and you look at the weapons they had, and the one that really comes to mind big time is Joe Montana back in the day, or even Steve Young, where you're throwing to Jerry Rice and you have Roger Craig or whoever you had around you at the time. Peyton Manning, all those MVP years, you had 2 Hall of Fame wide receivers and a Hall of Fame running back. I'm like, come on. And I get it. And I do agree that if Brock Purdy had been a first-round pick, he probably would be looked at differently. But it is what it is. You could make the argument, too, that Christian McCaffrey isn't getting enough run as a potential MVP candidate because people are just ignoring him.
Well, after last night, people were saying Tyreek Hill with Miami after noticing when he wasn't in the game and all that he does as well.
Vegas right now has Dak Prescott, your MVP leader in terms of odds, and then Brock Purdy is second, based on what I saw after the Monday night games.
Yeah, but the Cardinals beat the Cowboys, Paul.
By the way, and that might cost
them.
That loss by Dallas might cost them the home field, and Dallas has won 15 in a row at home. So you're like, oh, the Niners maybe put in cruise control because they have a 4-game lead in the division. No, you don't want to play Dallas right now at home, even though the Niners destroyed them. I get it earlier this year. The way Dak is playing and the way they're balling at home.
Didn't I see somewhere too, and I could be wrong, but didn't I see if the Eagles win out and their schedule is winner outable? I don't know how you'd say that. Don't they still win the division?
Yes, they do have the tiebreaker on Dallas. Yes.
So
yes. Yep.
Not only
it was Jerry Jones who said that. We're prepared to go on the road this postseason.
So not only the Cowboys have to worry about it, but
True. But the way the Eagles defense is playing right now, let's see, what's the Eagles defense missing from last year? A certain coordinator who's now a head coach in Arizona. Funny how that works. How the Eagles defense is among the league's worst in the red zone, giving up touchdowns. El Grande. Are you kidding me? So I'm curious which way the Eagles are trending when the Cardinals go there on New Year's Eve.
That's going to be such a cool story if they lose another game here.
Might have to go back to when JG was hired and some of the things that were written and said about him post Super Bowl. Might just have to refresh our memories.
Speaking of going back, cold tub time machine. You mentioned earlier.
I like that. I've never heard that one before.
Jerry Rice and
like Trey McPlay
and Joe Montana and John Taylor and Roger Craig and all those guys. This week's Cardinals Folktales. ... Take it from there,
yes.
Darren.
When Arizona met the Cardiac Cards, and it's going to be a piece about the time when Arizona, the Cardinals moved to the state in 1988 and played the 49ers, who ended up winning the Super Bowl that year. But they met at Sun Devil Stadium. 49ers had a 23-0 lead. The Cardinals made this epic comeback to win 24-23, and it looked like they had a chance to win the NFC East that year. It didn't happen because quarterback Neil Lomax ended up getting hurt. And that's all part of the story. But I had told Paul and Jim over here, this will all be new to Dani. I'm sure she'll be very excited. But I have my own little brush with, at the time, when the Cardinals moved to the Valley, it was March of '88. So I was just about to graduate from high school. Don't say it. And that summer, I took a summer job. It was a place called, a great name, Events with Tents. And essentially, me and my best friend growing up, we helped out this woman who ran you set up these giant tents outside, and they'd hold events, and we would help set up the tents and then do manual labor during these events to whatever.
And you pray there's no monsoon that blows your tent away.
I totally remember them being one on a golf course. It was not fun. But anyways, we got an assignment, and it was to go out to this tent, and we were into the summer by then. So it was 100 plus degrees, and we were going to go work at a new housing development. And it was going to be in Phoenix and way, way south. I grew up in the Scottsdale area. And in those days, other than the I-10, there were no freeways in this town. So I never really, growing up, even drove on freeways. And we were going to help, under this tent, serve lemonade while Neil Lomax, the quarterback of this new NFL team in town, was going to sign posters, his Grand Cannon posters, which I always loved.
That's good.
And people were going to come by, and they were going to try and sell them houses, whatever. I got in my car with my friend. I didn't have a car. My friend had to buy his own car. His parents made him buy his own car, so it had no air conditioning. So we're driving down the I-10 south, and in those days, once you got past like Guadalupe, you were on the edge of the earth. And we're driving, and I thought it was going to take forever. And I said, "Where are we getting off?" And he said, "Ray Road." And I said, "Ray Road? Where the hell is that?" And we got to Ray Road, and it was hell. Like, we pulled off, and it's the frickin' desert. I mean, it might as well have been the Sahara. I'm like, and I remember saying this in the car. We pulled off, and we're getting to wherever this, which is essentially Ahwatukee now. And there was only a handful of houses that had been built at this point. And I said, and unfortunately I used bad language, myself being 17 years old, who the F would live out here? Which is hilarious, because if you know the area now, if you get off at Ray Road in the I-10, it's obnoxious how many cars are there, and you can barely get off because it's so crowded all the time. It wasn't crowded that day. And we sat there for like 2 hours, and it was like, the person from the house, selling the houses, and she would take people into the trailer to try and show them stuff.
By horse. No,
most of the time, it was like these two just graduated high schoolers and Neil Lomax just hanging out, waiting for people to show up in 105 degrees, drinking lemonade. And that was my brush with fame with Neil Lomax.
My favorite part of that story is Events with Tents, because you know what you're getting right up front. What a great business name. Events with Tents. I like that.
I'm glad that's what you took out of it.
And less than a year later, his NFL career was done, right?
Yeah, I mean, by the end of the '88 season, he pretty much knew, because he ended up having a degenerative hip issue. He hurt his knee at the end of the '88 season, which basically derailed '88. But while he was hurt at the end of that season, they started realizing the hip was going to be a problem, and he had to retire after the '88 season.
But there was one monumental marquee win against the 49ers where they got down 23-0 against the eventual world champion 49ers, who were in the middle of winning 4 Super Bowls in 7 years, because it was 81, 84, 88, and 89 or something like that. So
that whole story, you have to tell them where they can at least find it, Darren. The Folktales.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It will be on our Arizona Cardinals YouTube channel starting 7 p.m. on Wednesday night. And the story right now is on azcardinals.com, which will also have the video and the video embedded in the story as soon as that comes out. And there will, of course, be a podcast thanks to Jim Omohundro and Paul Calvisi, which can also be found on all our podcast channels, as well as azcardinals.com and embedded in the story.
It's funny.
Great job, Darren.
I actually remember watching that game from the living room and my old man getting up all disgusted that they blew the 23-0 lead, because he was a 49ers fan. He was Mr. Joe Montana. So I remember, of course, Montana didn't play in that game. And so, yeah, it's interesting. Okay. All right, Dani. When do the playoffs start for your fantasy teams?
This week.
Weekend?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I have one other thing. Can I throw out there?
Please.
I will not be in the office tomorrow because my youngest son is graduating from ASU
Yay.
with double major, and I just want to say congratulations, Eric.
Wow.
Congratulations, Eric.
Very nice. All right. Double major. Was that double the cost for Dad?
Fortunately, one of the reasons he could double major is because he took enough college credits, dual enrollment in high school, that he not only got the double major, but he graduated in 3.5 years. So I'm happy about that.
Wow. Okay.
Very impressive.
High achiever. My goodness.
I can't wait. So that means, Paul, we get to wreak havoc when Darren's not in the building tomorrow.
There we go. All right. I'll follow your lead, Dani. That'll do it here on this edition of Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation.